In our practice, there are 3 rules of gaining competitive advantage that we found to be really salient and really relevant today. The first rule is that competitive advantage goes to the risk takers who pioneer new management techniques. And if you think about it, all the process on the business side of things in the 20th century has been about the development of new kinds of management techniques. No matter what function you're talking about, whether it's manufacturing or sales, promotion, product development, it's the management of that function and it's the techniques that will allow you to manage that function in a more effective way that have gained the people that instituted those techniques first competitive advantage. Because once something is tried and true, once everybody's doing the same thing, and once everybody has the same management tools, is using the same management techniques, it's no longer a source of competitive advantage. It's simply another cost of doing business. It's another ante that you have to put up to the table to play the game. A corollary to this rule is that if you aren't among the first to experiment with a new management technique and start to hone it, then you're always going to be playing catch-up to your better managed competitors. Another, perhaps more accurate way of saying this is that the people who tend to lag in market share and profitability and in business practice tend to be those who are a generation or more behind in their management practices. The second rule of competitive advantage that we found to be really relevant these days is that you have to realize that initial implementations of a new technique are always going to be suboptimal. That is, you never get anything right the first time you try it, especially if it's a big change. So competitive advantage is the result of pioneers in their field deliberately embarking on what they know are going to be suboptimal initial implementations of new techniques. However, the firms that do it first, the firms that deliberately do that, have the advantage of honing these new techniques to perfection, while their less well-managed competitors are just beginning to embark on their own initial suboptimal implementations. A good example of this is what happened to product development and the product development function starting back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, the idea of structured product development processes, obviously based around a proper process model, but the idea of taking product development from this freewheeling enterprise to a structured process was a new management idea, was a whole new management technique. The companies back then, like Motorola, that started to do it, gained a huge advantage over their less well-managed competitors. And by the time you got to the early 90s, maybe the mid-90s, companies that didn't have a good structured product development process, companies that hadn't instituted this new management technique, were really playing catch-up and they were hurting. The third salient rule of competitive advantage is that gaining it is always painful. Gaining competitive advantage, sort of by definition, means things have to change, and change is always painful. People don't like to change, institutions don't like to change, it's just a fact of life. However, it's most painful, gaining competitive advantage is most painful with companies that are always playing catch-up, because not only do they lose the advantage of being first, but they're trying to change in a time when there's a great deal of pressure on them. I mean, if you're a pioneer in a new management technique, you got a little bit of breathing room while you develop it, if you're out in front. But if you're trying to play catch-up at the last minute, the urgency for change is harder, you have to change at a faster pace, and so therefore the change is going to be even more painful. So you can see that firms that have a culture of embracing change have an advantage when it comes to gaining competitive advantage. In fact, we would like to make that even stronger. And it's our experience that firms that maintain competitive advantage have a culture of not just embracing change, but actually seeking it out, actually seeking to destroy the way they do business now, so that they can get on top of the next generation of business techniques and management techniques before their competitors. The analogy here is that of an enterprise to a ship at sea. You may have heard this story, but it's a good one. The question is, who has the most control over that ship when it's sailing along the sea or traversing the sea? Is it the captain? Is it the engineer? Is it the navigator? Different people have different opinions about that. But it's none of those. The person that has the most control over what that ship can do is the designer of the ship. And if you are in top management, the thing you have the most control over is designing the culture and the processes in your company. And that really is your primary job. So designing a culture that embraces change and designing the management processes that create the profits and the competitive advantage that will sustain you are what your job really is all about at the end of the day.